Thank you, Kimberly. It's my pleasure to summarize the nomination letters that were written by Jane Willenbring, Tammy Rittenauer, Frank Bazzalia, and myself for Professor Martha Carey Missy Eppes for the Marguerite T. Williams Award. This is difficult to do in under 5 minutes. So Missy, I'm going to be informal. Missy is eminently qualified for this award because of her groundbreaking interdisciplinary research linking rock fracture mechanics and surface processes, which has built new bridges between disciplines, and because she embodies a career spent in the service of science, society, and students. From an initial focus on the soil geomorphology of arid and glacial landscapes, Missy's work shifted to focus on rock cracking. And through this work, she's led the way in showing that neither extreme temperature ranges nor water expansion in pre-existing cracks are necessary to fracture rocks. Instead, by rigorously applying fracture mechanics to understanding physical weathering, she has demonstrated that physical weathering progresses by moisture-dependent subcritical fracturing under virtually all Earth surfaces and near-surface environmental conditions. So through this work, I think the key point is that she's single-handedly leading the effort to merge the disparate disciplines of geomorphology and fracture mechanics and change our long-held ideas about how rocks physically break down and thus how soils form, how global biogeochemical cycles operate, etc. And as Jane Willenbring expressed it, I doubt it was her goal to change paradigm and create new textbook explanations when setting out on this path. Rather, I gather from speaking with her and hearing her enthusiasm and energy that Dr. Eppes is simply curious and wanted to understand the physical mechanisms governing the processes she observed and inferred. Fortunately, she is a brilliant scientist and created her own research landscape. And Missy's substantial service, teaching, and mentoring contributions include a myriad of efforts for the scientific community, society, students, and women and minoritized individuals in STEM fields. She has proven herself to be a generous contributor, planner, and matchmaker. I like that word. It wasn't in my letter, but I like it. A geomorphic matchmaker. Other researchers cold email and ask about sensors and instruments she tried and used without success for years before settling iteratively on designs and setups that worked. Although altruism is rarely rewarded in academia, she shares what she has learned over years to kickstart others' research and saves other people's time and resources. Missy has created a mini critical zone observatory near Charlotte called the Red Layer Observatory, where early career scientists and trainees are welcomed and mentored. And she's also notable for enhancing the representation of diverse scientists among those nominated for professional awards, advising and mentoring students from underrepresented groups, involving undergraduates in research, and reaching out to K through 12 students. And to quote again from Jane Willenbring, Dr. Eppes is an accomplished, brilliant mid-career researcher who devotes countless hours and an abundance of energy toward teaching, mentoring, and community building goals. When finding a chasm, she creates community. She embodies the AGU of the future, an organization of scientist weavers, tying communities and knitting ideas and creating something beautiful in the process. And one more quote to end with from Frank Bazzalia. Dr. Eppes is collegial, understanding, and non-judgmental. More importantly, she's kind. Everything that Dr. Eppes has done in her career is a lesson of how science should be done and how fearless intellectual curiosity compels us to reach across traditional disciplines in solving a problem. Missy.
Oh, the picture. Sorry. Thanks so much, all of you, Ellen, and a big thanks to Jane Willenbring, of course, for nominating me for the award. Jane and I don't actually know each other that well, but like Ellen, that word matchmaker really struck me as Jane being quite intuitive about me. And if you've met me over the years, you in fact may have asked yourself, why is Missy so excited to talk to me about cracks? Well, part of that is that I get it honestly. My dad was a judge and politician in the state of South Carolina, and he never met a stranger. And I grew up going to parties with him and events in South Carolina politics, and talking to people is part of my core. But another part of that is that I am truly fascinated about the fact that fractures are a glue that binds all of our research together, every one of us in this room. It's so interesting to me. But when Gordon and Kimberly called me to let me know about this award, Gordon kept saying, you know, you can talk about anything, Missy, anything. And so part of me is torn because, of course, the Williams Award is really steeped in diversity, equity, inclusion, and also mid-career. And so in my mind, I feel like it's so important to normalize issues related to mid-career scientists by talking about them. And one of the big issues, for example, is kids. So I had my first child when I was 38. I was a year after tenure, and that probably is not a coincidence. And those of you that are parents or caregivers here will maybe empathize with me that every single day since then, I've had to make a choice every day between my career, my kids, my career. And I can tell you that every one of those days, including the day I made the decision to leave them and come to Chicago from Strasbourg, France, over the holidays, I feel like I've made the wrong decision. I feel like I was hurting my kids if I chose my career or vice versa every day. So an award like this serves to reassure me, and I hope others of you who are in your mid-career, that you know, maybe you're not doing as badly as you think at your job. And if that's true, maybe you're also not doing as badly as you think with your family, knock on wood. Well, the other topic that I feel like needs normalized in mid-career science, especially for women, is menopause. Did you know that there's like 3 species of whales and us as humans? And that's it for mammals that go through menopause. That is it. And some people think, in fact, that it's because of menopause that Homo sapiens were actually able to dominate human species and form societies like we have today. So think of that the next time you encounter a 50-something-year-old woman who's frazzled and can't find her glasses because they're on her head and she's forgotten her appointment with you or maybe your name. And just remember that there's probably more going on in her life than just the normal busyness of a mid-career scientist. So, as dear as those 2 topics are to me, well, what I really wanted to talk to you about was cracks. And so I'll leave you, well, those of you that aren't as interested, I won't bore you with data, and instead I'll leave you with a story. So it was about January of 2021, and I get a random email followed the same day by a call from a woman. Her name is Melissa Riker. She's the director and choreographer at the Kinesis Project Dance Theater in Manhattan. They work with Opera on Tap and do these amazing outdoor dances. And she was choreographing a piece about cracking. And she told me the reason for this is that over the course of COVID, she said, she had watched her dancers cracking, both literally and figuratively. Figuratively because they had lost their performances, their theaters, their whole professions really to this pandemic. And then literally their bodies were cracking because they had not been used or they had been used in weird ways over the course of COVID. And so she had called me that day because as she was making this piece, she wanted to better scientifically, she said, understand cracking. And she found my name on the internet. If you Google Missy and cracks, I will come up. So, but I kept talking to her and I realized that Melissa had in fact taken these scientific concepts and she had intuited them precisely, correctly by herself by thinking about cracking as a metaphor for how we as humans get through extended distressful times like COVID, or maybe now like something like Ukraine. And so, for example, she had recognized that cracking doesn't always happen all at once. It's a slow, progressive process, and it's because there are these stresses that are coming from every different direction and that are small, but they add up all together. And though there's a term for that, of course, in fracture mechanics, but she didn't know that. And so she came up with her own term. She called it crackling. And then she recognized, though, that this crackling, this subcritical crack growth, actually served to strengthen people, she thought. That by cracking, the stress was getting accommodated somehow. That her dancers were becoming stronger because they were able to withstand the same stresses after that had occurred the first time. So, so the piece, the work that she is creating then has hope. It's called Capacity, or the Work of Crackling. And she is going to be presenting it in Manhattan and in Seattle, and you can keep an eye out for that. But so I'll leave you then with these last words about cracks. And those of you that are here that are actually professionally interested in rock cracking, you can listen to them, and I hope that it sends you off in some interesting new direction in your research, because the words are true. But if you're not, you're kind of meh about cracks, then listen to these words as Melissa would have you listen to them, where when you hear the word rock, sorry, we'll go back to Marguerite. When you hear the word rock or rocks, substitute the word people or person or people. There's no rock on Earth that does not have cracks. These ever-evolving defects caused by the greatest and the least of forces. These fractures alter the very nature of the rock itself, influencing her tendency to break or heal, her ability to withstand great stresses, and her capacity to retain precious resources. Try to name a single event in rock's history not connected to cracks in some way. Please email me if you think of one. Thank you.
That was beautiful.